The night was heavy with a silence that felt older than the walls around me, and as I sat alone in the dim glow of a single lamp, I wondered how a heart could break without a sound, how a mother could stand still while the world she built slowly cracked beneath her feet. There are moments in life when the truth arrives uninvited, slipping under doors and through windows until it wraps around you like cold air, and you know you will never be warm again. It began with the phone vibrating on the table, a soft, trembling sound like a wounded bird. It took me a moment to turn it over to see the message that would shift everything I knew about my son, my only child, the boy I raised with trembling hands and dreams larger than our old home. The words were simple and sharp, like a blade. They said that he had been seen driving around the city with girls, laughing with them, while his wife, the woman who had stood beside him with love stronger than storms, was dying in a hospital bed, barely clinging to a breath that kept slipping away. I felt the world tilt, not violently, but slowly, like a sinking boat, and for a moment I could not breathe. I closed my eyes, trying to remember the boy he once was, the small child who cried when he saw a wounded cat, the teenager who brought flowers for his grandmother, the man who promised his bride forever. But the message lay before me, whispering a truth that did not match the son I thought I had raised. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of years settle on my shoulders, and I walked into the window. The street was quiet, the lights soft, the world peaceful in a way that mocked the storm forming inside me. I placed a hand on the cold glass and let the ache move through me like a river, searching for a place to break free. There are moments when a mother's love is tested, and this was one of them, because love is not blind. It sees everything, even the shadows, even the failings, even the betrayals. I thought of his wife, of the girl who used to sit in my kitchen smiling shyly as she stirred tea, of the warm way she said my name, of the softness in her eyes when she looked at my son. She loved him deeper than he ever understood. And now, as her life faded like a candle fighting the wind, he was out there, floating in a world of neon lights and shallow laughter, forgetting the vows he once spoke with trembling hands. A heaviness spread across my chest, and I felt something rise within me, something ancient, something fierce. It was not anger, not at first. It was grief, pure grief, the kind that shakes the bones, the kind that reminds you of everything you taught your child and everything they chose to forget. I had held my son in my arms the night he was born, promising him a life filled with guidance and love. And now I wondered where I had failed, wondered what I missed, what softness I gave that became weakness, what forgiveness I offered that became permission. I walked to the chair and sank down slowly, pressing my hands together as if in prayer, though no words formed. Just breath, just pain, just the quiet storm curling inside me like smoke. I remembered the last time I saw his wife, her frail hands resting on the blanket, her breath thin, almost transparent, yet her smile still gentle, always gentle. She had asked about him, her voice barely a whisper, and I had lied, telling her he was resting, telling her he would be there soon, telling her he loved her. Because sometimes mercy is the only truth you can offer. But mercy had limits, and tonight they shifted into something sharper. When a mother sees injustice, when she sees someone hurting the innocent, her heart becomes a shield and a weapon at once. My son had crossed the line, and the path back would not be easy. I needed to face him. I needed to pull the veil from his eyes and show him the destruction he had created, not with rage, but with truth. Truth can break more than anger ever could. I grabbed my keys, my coat, my trembling resolve, and stepped into the night. The air was cold, brushing against my skin like a warning. The streetlights hummed, the world stretched out in quiet shadows, and I felt an ache settle deep in my soul. I had never imagined I would confront my own child like this, never thought the boy I raised would force me to choose between love and conscience. As I drove, the city glowed around me, bright and harsh. The noise of nightlife pulsed like a heartbeat, reckless and alive. I knew where he would be. The places he visited were not secrets, not anymore. The pain in my chest thickened as I approached a street lined with neon signs, casting colors that looked too loud, too careless for the night his wife was fighting to survive. Then I saw his car parked beneath the flickering light, and laughter spilled from inside like broken music. I parked far enough to watch him step out, with a girl leaned too close, her smile painted bright, her hand on his arm. My son looked careless, free, untouched by the gravity of reality. He looked like a stranger wearing the face of the child I raised. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not violently, but with a silence that felt final. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of years settle on my shoulders, and I walked toward him slowly, each breath heavy, each step carrying the weight of a mother's love and a mother's fury. He did not see me at first, too lost in a world that glittered with lies. When he finally turned, his eyes widened, the girl stepping back, his smile fading into confusion, then guilt, then something colder. In that moment, I felt the power of truth gathering inside me like a tide, ready to rise, ready to sweep away every excuse, every lie he had built around himself. And I knew this night would change him, or destroy him. But either way, it had to happen. He stood before me as if the night itself had frozen around him, and for a long, fragile moment, neither of us moved. The street hummed with distant music and passing cars, but between us, there was only a silence, thick enough to swallow every breath. The girl beside him shifted uncomfortably, then slipped away, melting into the shadows with the kind of guilt that needs no explanation. My son watched her leave, then turned back to me, his eyes wide, his posture stiff, as if he were suddenly a child again, caught doing something he could not undo. I walked closer, slowly, letting the weight of the truth wrap around us like a cloak. And the closer I came, the more he shrank inside himself. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Only a small sound, a broken inhale that betrayed the panic rising in his chest. He had always been like this when confronted, folding inward like paper, unable to hide the tremble beneath his voice. But tonight was different. Tonight, my silence pressed against him stronger than any words could have. When I stopped in front of him, he looked away, avoiding my eyes, searching the ground as if the answers he needed were hidden in the cracks of the pavement. His hands fidgeted, restless, unsteady, and for the first time, I saw not a man, but a boy, lost inside the ruins of his own choices. A boy who had forgotten what love required, what loyalty meant, what promises were made for. I said his name slowly, gently, letting each sound sink into the air without anger, without accusation, only truth. He flinched as if my weight carried everything he had tried to escape. He whispered that he could explain, but the words trembled and broke before they reached me. I raised a hand, just slightly, enough to quiet him, because explanations were nothing without remorse, and remorse had not yet touched his soul. We stood beneath the flickering light, my shadow stretching over him, and I felt the cold wind weave through us like a quiet witness. I asked him if he knew where his wife was at this very moment, if he knew how thin her breaths had become, how the doctors whispered outside her room as if afraid to disturb the fragile thread holding her to this world. His face twisted, and he nodded slowly, saying yes, he knew. But his voice cracked halfway through, and the shame in his eyes flickered like a candle struggling to stay lit. I wanted to ask him why he had left her, why he chose laughter with strangers over the trembling hand of the woman who had given everything for him, why the vows spoken beneath soft lights and warm smiles had become empty echoes inside him. But questions felt too small for the ache pressing inside my chest. So I simply asked him to look at me, really look at me. When he finally did, I saw fear, the kind that grows in the shadows of guilt. His voice broke as he whispered that he was tired, that he felt trapped, that he did not know how to carry so much grief, that watching her fade each day was tearing him apart, and he needed a place where he could feel alive, even for a moment. His confession spilled out like water bursting through a crack, soft, desperate, messy, and raw. I listened, letting every word settle around us, not to excuse him, but to understand the storm raging inside him. He was afraid of losing her, afraid of watching love crumble into sickness and sorrow, afraid of facing the truth that life had become heavier than he ever imagined. And so instead of holding her hand, he ran. He searched for noise, for distraction, for moments bright enough to blind him from the reality he could not bear. And in his running, he abandoned the one person who needed him most. A mother knows when her child is breaking, even when he hides behind careless laughter and hollow smiles. And in that moment, I saw the fractures inside him, the pieces too sharp to hold without bleeding. But pain does not justify betrayal, and fear does not grant permission to hurt the innocent. I stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder, not softly, not harshly, but firmly enough that he felt the strength he once drew from me. He trembled under my touch, like a man who had been wandering too long without shelter. I told him his fear did not give him the right to disappear, that love is not a place you leave when it becomes heavy, that marriage is not built on sunshine alone, but on storms, shared hand in hand, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. He tried to speak again, but tears filled his voice, turning his words into fractured whispers. He said he did not know how to face her, how to look into eyes dimmed by pain and know he had wasted the time she had left. He said he was afraid she would see the guilt in him and he would never be able to forgive himself. He lowered his head, and the quiet sound of his breathing shook with shame and regret. I let the silence settle for a moment, letting the world around us blur until it was only him and me standing in the dim light. I told him that running from guilt only deepens it, that the only path forward is through the truth, through the pain, through the courage to stand beside the person he once promised everything to. I reminded him the day he married her, the way he looked at her as if she carried the entire sky inside her smile, the way he held her hands as if nothing could ever break their bond. His tears slipped silently, falling onto the pavement below, and with each drop, I felt the weight of his remorse gathering, like rain before a storm. He whispered that he wanted to make it right, but he feared it was too late. He feared she would leave this world believing he had abandoned her, believing he did not love her, believing she was alone. The ache in my chest tightened, and I felt my own eyes burn with tears because his fear was real, and time was moving like water, slipping through clenched fingers. I told him there was still a chance, a small, fragile chance for redemption if he chose to walk back into that hospital room and sit beside her and let her feel his presence, his love, his truth. I told him she deserved that, and he needed it more than he realized. He wiped his face, shaking his head as if trying to find courage buried deep inside him. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and collapsed into my arms. He was not a grown man in that moment. He was my child, trembling, broken, reaching for something solid in a world he had let fall apart. I held him tightly, letting him cry, letting him break, letting him release every shadow he had carried alone. When he finally pulled back, his face was streaked with tears, but something had changed inside his eyes, a flicker of resolve, small but real. I told him this night would follow him forever, but what he did next would define whether it haunted him or healed him. He nodded slowly, breathing deep, as if gathering the pieces of himself scattered by fear and guilt. I told him to follow me to the hospital, to face the truth, to stand beside his wife in her final hours, or final days, or final breaths. Whatever time she had left belonged to honesty, not escape. He hesitated only once, then whispered that he would go, that he needed to go. I turned away, leading him toward the car,
And as we walked, I felt a storm beginning to shift, not ending, not calming, but moving toward a place where truth could finally be spoken, where wounds could finally be seen, where love could either be rebuilt or laid to rest with dignity. The night felt different as we drove, the city lights fading behind us, replaced by the cold, quiet roads leading to the hospital. Each mile carried a weight, each moment a question that neither of us dared speak out loud. But his silence now was not avoidance. It was preparation. It was the slow awakening of a man who had finally seen the darkness inside him and wanted to walk towards something brighter, even if the path was filled with pain. And as the hospital came into view, I felt the world shift again, not with fear, not with anger, but with the quiet, trembling hope that redemption, though fragile, might still be possible.
The hospital stood before us like a silent witness, its windows glowing softly in the darkness as if guarding the fragile breaths of the souls resting inside. My son stepped out of the car slowly, his legs unsteady, his face pale with the weight of the moment he could no longer outrun. The cold air wrapped around us, and for a long heartbeat, he simply stared at the entrance, as though the doors themselves held every fear he had buried inside him. I walked beside him, not touching him, yet letting my presence be the anchor he needed. His breaths were uneven, rising and falling like waves colliding with the shore, and when he finally moved forward, it was with the trembling courage of someone walking into a truth he had spent too long avoiding. The hallways were dim and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin, reminding you that every second matters. We moved through the corridors, step by slow step, until we reached the door of her room. The soft hum of machines seeped through the small crack beneath it, and my son stopped, his hand hovering just inches from the handle. His entire body shook, as if the truth waiting on the other side was too heavy to touch. I whispered that he was not alone, that whatever waited inside, he would face it with honesty, with courage, with the heart he thought he had lost. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and for a moment, he looked like the boy I once held during thunderstorms, whispering that storms end, that fear passes, that love remains if you hold on tightly enough. With a fragile exhale, he pushed open the door. The room was quiet, lit by a faint golden glow that softened the edges of everything. She lay on the bed, her face fragile but peaceful, her breath shallow but steady. The silence in the room felt sacred, as if time had slowed to protect the softness of her final moments. She looked smaller than before, her body thinner, her hands resting lightly against the sheets as though she were floating somewhere between here and somewhere far beyond pain. My son froze in the doorway, grief crashing over him so suddenly he reached for the wall to steady himself. The sight of her fragile form broke him in a way nothing else ever could. His lips trembled, his eyes filled, and he took one step forward, then stopped again, trapped between guilt and love, between fear and longing. I whispered his name gently, and he moved slowly toward her, each step a confession, each breath a prayer. He reached the side of the bed and sank into the chair she had saved for him for months, hoping he would sit by her again. His hands hovered above hers, trembling, afraid to touch, afraid to be forgiven, afraid he did not deserve to even be there. But love does not measure worthiness. Love simply waits. Then her fingers moved, just barely lifting with the tiniest flicker of life, and he gasped, a broken sound escaping him. She had felt him. She knew he was there, even through the veil of pain and fading strength. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking as though returning from a distant place, and when her gaze finally met his, a softness spread across her face, a softness so deep, so gentle, it shattered him completely. He whispered her name, a whisper soaked in regret and longing, and she looked at him, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with the quiet understanding of someone who had loved him beyond measure. Her lips lifted in the faintest smile, and that small, fragile smile held more forgiveness than any words could ever carry. My son broke. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to her hand, and his tears falling in silent streams onto her skin. And for the first time since she became ill, he let himself feel everything. Every fear, every mistake, every moment he wished he could take back spilled out of him in trembles and breaths that shook his entire body. He whispered apologies, not with words, but with the shattering of his soul. He begged for forgiveness without speaking. He held her hand as if it were the last tether keeping him from drowning. She lifted her fingers slowly, brushing against his hair with a tenderness that felt otherworldly. Her touch was weak, yet filled with a love so pure it felt like light pouring into the darkest corners of him. She did not scold him. She did not ask where he had been. She simply held him with the depth of someone who had loved him even when his own heart had gone astray. I stepped back quietly, letting them exist in their own fragile universe for a moment, letting the room fill with the kind of silence that heals rather than breaks. Love, in its truest form, does not demand. It understands, it forgives, it holds even when the world falls apart around it. He told her he was afraid. He told her he could not bear the thought of losing her. He told her he ran because he did not know how to live in a world where her smile might disappear. She listened, her eyes soft, her breathing slow, and when he finished pouring out his heart, she squeezed his hand gently, as if telling him it was all right. As if telling him she knew the truth behind every flaw, every fear, every moment he had lost himself. And in that small, fragile gesture, something inside him healed. Hours passed in gentle, quiet breaths. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes she did. Sometimes they simply held each other, letting the warmth of their fingers speak what words could never capture. I watched them from the corner of the room, feeling the weight inside my chest shift into something softer, something aching but peaceful. As dawn approached, the sky outside turned pale blue and the first light seeped into the window. Her breathing slowed, growing thinner, lighter, like a feather drifting on the wind. My son held her hand tighter, whispering her name with trembling devotion, promising he would never run again, promising he would carry her love within him forever, promising he would learn from the pain he had caused and become a man she could be proud of. Her eyes fluttered open one last time, soft and full of a love that did not fade even as her strength did. She looked at him, then at me, then back at him again, and with a final gentle breath, she slipped into a stillness that felt like a sigh, a release, a quiet passing into peace. My son let out a sound so deep, so raw, it felt like the world cracked around him. He leaned over her, pressing his forehead to her chest, and wept with the kind of grief that reshapes a soul. He clung to her as if trying to hold her spirit inside this world for a moment longer, but the room had already grown still in a way that could not be undone. I moved to him, placing a hand on his back, and he collapsed into my arms, his body shaking with heartbreak that had waited too long to be felt. He cried not only for her loss, but for the guilt, the love, the regret, the forgiveness she had given him with her final breath. He cried for the man he had been and the man he now knew he must become. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in grief, wrapped in memory, wrapped in the quiet truth that love, even in its final moments, has the power to destroy and rebuild at the same time. When he finally lifted his head, his face was streaked with tears, but something in his eyes had changed. The fear was gone, the denial was gone. In its place was a resolve shaped by pain and sharpened by loss. He whispered that he would honor her, that he would live differently, that he would carry her love like a light inside him, guiding every choice from this moment forward. And in that fragile morning light, I believed him. Sometimes a heart breaks so completely, it becomes something new, something stronger, something softer. And as we stepped out of the room into the early dawn, I knew my son had changed forever, not because he was destroyed, but because he had finally understood the weight of love, the weight of truth, the weight of the vows he once spoke, and the cost of forgetting them. He walked beside me, silent but steady, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the man he could be, rising from the ruins of the man he had been. And though the world felt heavy, the morning felt hopeful in its own quiet way, because from the ashes of his mistakes, a new beginning had finally grown.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every single subscription motivates me to bring you even more exciting and dramatic HOA stories. And don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. I'll see you in the next story, where justice gets even more satisfying.